Andrew Young will be talking about the blue-banded bees as biosensors.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm going to talk to you about this insect. How do we make it go down? About this insect specimen. It's part of the Australian National Insect Collection, where it's recorded as ANIC database number 034457. It's a blue-banded bee, probably Amygdala cingulata, in the family Apidae. In Australia, the genus Amygdala is made up of about 40 species that are spread across 3 subgenera. Now I'm going to take my colleague's word for that. I'm a botanist. But I'm talking about this specimen today because it just struck me as so interesting. Blue-banded bees have a fairly wide geographical distribution in Australia. They're solitary bees. They live in grassland and woodland habitats. You can also find them in urban areas. The females are interesting. They make their burrows in the soil, although also if you live in an old Canberra house, you'll find that they may well have made their burrow in the mortar, between your bricks. They're generous pollinators. They visit a range of native plants, but they do seem to prefer plants with blue or purple flowers. And interestingly, they use buzz pollination to pollinate those plants. Now, we've got about 2,000 specimens of Amygdala in the collection in Canberra, including tens of primary types. And this particular specimen was collected on the 4th of January, I think you can make that out, in 1940 from around Lismore in New South Wales. This is in the eastern part of the species range, but it isn't at a range edge. It's not at a particular edge of the environmental envelope of the species either. There's nothing particular special about where we got it from. So this is a specimen of a fairly common bee collected from well within its range. We have quite a lot of others like it in the collection. It doesn't sound remarkable, so why have I chosen to fly quite a long way, come here, talk to you about it? Other than obviously, just like the previous specimen, it is incredibly beautiful. Well, I chose 3034457 because it epitomises the theme, I think, of this week's meeting. The rapidly evolving value proposition of natural history collections as research tools. It's an example of how new technologies are letting us add useful new data layers to old specimens, significantly enhancing their value for research. In this case, it's literally a new data layer that makes the difference, because the interesting thing about this specimen is the information we're now getting from metagenomic analysis of the DNA sequencing of the layer of pollen that it still carries on its body after 75 years. By sequencing that pollen, we're able to tell you what plants B034457 visited on the 4th of January, the day she was collected. So now, rather than just knowing where she was that day, we can ask her what she was doing and who she was doing it with. We got there in the end. Not only that, and this is the really interesting bit, by comparing data, as I said, we have many of these in the collection, by comparing data from 034457 with metagenomic data from pollen loads on other bees collected from this region between then and now, we can do a whole range of interesting things. And at the moment, we're looking at 4 major research questions. 1, we can ask questions about how pollinator behaviour and pollination networks have been affected by habitat loss and land use change over the last 75 years. Secondly, we can look at historical changes in the floral phenology of individual plant species, because the pollen turns up at different times during the year as a signal on the bees. Third, we can examine how native bees have adapted to the presence of crops in the landscape as pollen resources, and really interestingly, how important native bees are now to the local horticultural industry. And finally, we can even look at evidence of weed invasion in the region and track weed invasion pathways by when and where DNA from weed pollen turns up in these pollen loads. So all of this and more is recorded in the pollen DNA signal on these small blue-banded furry little time travellers. And we've got thousands of specimens just like 034457 in our collection. They're all sitting there waiting patiently to tell us what they know. And now we've got the genomic technology, the informatics, and the environmental analytics to understand them. And they're telling some really interesting stories. Thank you.